welcome everybody to Sunday School of Upper Room Ministries here in Dover, Pennsylvania. We're so glad that you've joined us today for our continuing study in the prophecies of the Bible, what have come to pass and what have not yet come to pass. Just a reminder, all these sessions are being recorded onto DVD and will be available in a full set upon completion. So if you've missed a few episodes here and there, don't worry about it. You can catch up later. We last left off in Isaiah chapter 29, so we shall now move on to chapter 30. Let's open up there. Chapter 30, verses 1 through 17, is prophecy 681. This details the wrath of God that is to fall on Judah for trying to form an alliance with the Egyptians as opposed to seeking God for help. Let's go through the various sections of this prophecy. Start with the first two verses. Woe to the rebellious children, saith the Lord. And that says, verse 2, that they walk to go down into Egypt, and have not asked at my mouth to strengthen themselves in the strength of Pharaoh, and to trust in the shadow of Egypt. I mean, think about it. This is God's chosen people trying to make an alliance with Egypt, the very land that kept him captive so long ago for 400 years. And so for them to put their faith in Egypt rather than God is just a great insult to God. Total insult. Verses 6 and 7 outline all the gifts that the men of Judah are going to bring to Egypt in an effort to persuade them to join them. But verse 7 says, for the Egyptians shall help in vain and to no purpose. Therefore I have cried concerning this, their strength is to sit still. Isaiah is already prophesying this alliance will do them no good. And then in verse 8 it says, now go and write it before them in a table, and note it in a book, that it may be for the time to come forever and ever that this is a rebellious people, blind children, children that will not hear the law of the Lord. So, Isaiah has been given the task to write this down, largely so that future generations will learn from the error of this particular generation. Of course, as we all know, it's basic human nature to rebel against God. So, can't trust that anyone will learn from it. And then you have verses 12 through 17. That outlines the judgment of God that will fall upon them, and that would come to pass in 2 Kings chapter 25. Okay. Now that is a prophecy that did come to pass. We now turn to the second half of the chapter, where we have a variety of prophecies, and all of these are unfulfilled, but will take place in the millennium. Starting in verses 18 and 19. First it says, and therefore will the Lord wait, that he may be gracious unto you, and therefore will be exalted, that he may have mercy upon you. For the Lord is a God of judgment. Blessed are all they that wait for him. For the people that shall dwell in Zion at Jerusalem, thou shalt weep no more. Now, this is this right here is the prophecy. The people shall dwell in Zion at Jerusalem, thou shalt weep no more. When God says you will weep no more, he means exactly that. From that point on, you shall never weep again. A verse in the Bible that backs this up is found in the book of Revelation, chapter 21, verse 4. It says, "And God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There shall be no more death, no sorrow, nor crying. There shall be no more pain, for the former things have passed away." This was at the end of the millennial reign, when Satan, the beast, and the false prophet have all been thrown into the lake of fire, as have everybody else who has been in rebellion against God and unrepentant of it. God is saying there will be no more crying, no more sorrow. So this is something that can only happen during the second advent of Christ. That was prophecy 1682. Prophecy 1683 is found in verses 20 through 22. Particularly, the prophecy is that all idols will be destroyed. All the idols that the Jewish people at the time of the millennium possess. Verse 22 says, "Ye shall defile also the covering of thy graven images of silver, and the ornament of thy molten images of gold. Thou shalt cast them away as a menstruous cloth. Thou shalt say unto it, Get thee hence." I mean, they're casting away gold and silver idols as though they were the filthy rags. So this is total turning away from everything that is false. Not just graven images, but also money and possessions that people put their faith in. Too often, the people of today's world put their faith in their material things and what they've saved up here on earth. Of course, Jesus says, "Do not store up treasures on earth where moth and rust can get to them, rather store up treasures in heaven." And this will, in verse 22, depicts the final rejection of earthly possessions as idols. Okay, then we move on to 1684. Verses 23, 24, and 25. These three verses outline the material blessings that will befall Jerusalem, Zion, upon the second coming of Christ. Verse 23 talks about there'll be a plentiful rain, and bread of the increase of the earth shall be fat and plenteous. And also it talks about cattle feeding in large pasture, and oxen and donkeys. They shall eat clean foods, which has been winnowed in the shovel and with the fan, and there upon every high mountain and upon every high hill, rivers and streams in the day of the great slaughter, when the towers will fall. So there's going to be plenty of rivers and streams in the day of the great slaughter, when the towers will fall. The great slaughter most likely refers to the aftermath of Armageddon, when all the armies of the Antichrist will be slaughtered. Verse 26, it's prophecy 1685. Says, "Moreover, the light of the moon shall be as the light of the sun, and the light of the sun shall be sevenfold, as the light of 7 days. In that day the Lord bindeth up the breach of his people, and healeth the stroke of their wounds." So the moon shall shine like the sun, and the sun shall shine like 7 suns. And I believe this is literal, as far as what it could possibly refer to, what future events. It'll allow me to read Revelation 21, verse 23 to you. It says, The city had no need of the sun or of the moon to shine in it, for the glory of God illuminated it. The Lamb is the light. There will be no more night now in New Jerusalem. There'll be no night in New Jerusalem. So, could this be what it's referring to? Well, I'm not entirely sure, because in Revelation it says there's no need for the sun or the moon because the Lamb is the light. So that might not be it. But I definitely believe this is an event that has not yet happened, because I know of no other event in the past where this has taken place. So again, that is 1685. Prophecy 1686, in verses 27 through 28. This is the judgment of Israel's enemies, and I do believe it is this is of the millennial kingdom, because in verse 28 it talks about, and his breath as an overflowing stream shall reach into the midst of the neck, to sift the nations with the sieve of vanity, and there shall be a bridle in the jaws of the people, causing them to err. What stands out is where it says to sift the nations. So we're talking about multiple nations, which will be the case in the end times. Multiple nations will rise up against Israel. Actually, it also talks about to sift the nations with a sieve. This very well could refer to the separation of the sheep and the goats, found in Matthew 25. Also, possibly the separation of the wheat and the tares. Yes, there is definitely a separation going on right here. Verse 29, prophecy 1687. This foretells of a song that will be sung in the millennial. It says, "Ye shall have a song, as in the night, when a holy solemnity is kept, and gladness of the heart, as when one goeth with a pipe to come into the mountain of the Lord, to the mighty one of Israel." All right? And prophecy 1688. Verses 30 through 33. This is a judgment that will fall upon the Antichrist. We know it's the Antichrist because in verse 31 it says, "For through the voice of the Lord shall the Assyrian be beaten down, which smote with a rod." The Assyrian, as we already established in previous episodes, is the Antichrist. And so that's why we believe that this is also an end-time prophecy. And in verse 30, it outlines a sevenfold judgment upon the enemies, the Assyrian in particular. They are, the Lord shall have his glorious voice be heard. He will show the lightning down of his arm, manifest indignation of his anger, show the flame of a devouring fire, make a great scattering, send a tempest, and send great hailstones. If you read Revelation chapter 16, verses 17 through 21, hailstones are also sent from heaven. So this most likely refers to that particular time. And verse 32 it says, "And in every place where the Lord grounded, a staff shall pass, which the Lord shall lay upon him. It shall be with tarbets and harps, and in battles of shaking will he fight with it." Now that means that in every place where the Lord permits the appointed rod and staff of the Antichrist to pass, there will be music and rejoicing when he shall fight against the scourge to destroy it completely. We now move on to chapter 31, verses 1 through 3. This is a judgment that fell upon wait a minute, I'm sorry. This actually outlines the Babylonian invasion and their triumph in 2 Kings chapter 25. Particularly, talks about, it pretty much outlines again the failure of Judah's reliance upon Egypt. It says, "Woe to them that go down to Egypt for help, and stay on horses, and trust in chariots, because they are many, and horsemen, because they are very strong, but that look not unto the Holy One of Israel." And that's the same thing that we saw in the first part of the last chapter. And then in verse 3, it says, "Now the Egyptians are men, and not God, and their horses not flesh, not spirit. And the Lord shall stretch out his hand, both he that helpeth shall fall, and he that is open shall fall down, and they all shall fail together." So again, this again foretells the Babylonian invasion, and where Judah fell, and apparently Egypt also fell with them. For Nebuchadnezzar, his Babylon empire was a worldwide dominant empire. They didn't just conquer Judah or Israel; they conquered several nations. We then go to verses 4 through 7. This is prophecy 1690. These verses foretell of Jehovah's protection at the millennium. It says, "For the Lord hath spoken unto me, like as a lion and the young lion roaring on his prey, when a multitude of shepherds is called forth against him. He will not be afraid of their voice, nor abase himself for the noise of them. So shall the Lord of hosts come down to fight for Mount Zion and for the hill thereof." Now notice the language there. The Lord of hosts shall come down. Where's he coming down from? He's coming down from heaven, and to fight for Mount Zion. Now we already know that's where the establishment of the millennial kingdom will be. So this is obviously talking about the second coming. Right. Okay, then we turn to verses 8 through 9. This is prophecy 1691. These verses outline the fall of the Antichrist. It says, "Then shall the Assyrian," remember the Assyrian is the Antichrist, "fall with a sword, not of a mighty man, and the sword not of a mean man shall devour him, but he shall flee from the sword, and his young men shall be discomfited, and he shall pass over to his stronghold for fear, and his princes shall be afraid of the ensign." Ensign is a banner. "Saith the Lord, whose fire is in Zion, and his furnace is in Jerusalem." That word there, furnace, refers to the baking oven, and which no doubt refers to the one which the bread of worship will be baked at the millennial temple. Both the fire and the furnace picture Jehovah as having a home in Jerusalem, and this prophecy predicts his defense of it in destroying his enemies under the Antichrist. All right. Chapter 32. Starting in verse 1, it says, "Behold, a king shall reign in righteousness, and princes shall rule." This is prophecy 1692. The king, reigning in righteousness, obviously is Christ. And the princes, they shall rule in judgment. That refers to the saints that will return with him for the second coming. Allow me to read Revelation chapter 5, verse 10. It says, and have made his kings and priests to our God, have made us kings and priests to our God, and we shall reign on the earth. Did you catch that? Reign on the earth? That's what princes do. They reign. All right, and furthermore, in verses 2 through 5, this talks about the blessing that will fall under his reign. It says, a man, the king, Jesus, shall be as a hiding place from the wind and a covert from the tempest, as rivers in a dry place and the shadow of a great rock in a weary land. That sounds very much like the language in Psalm 91, he who dwells in the secret place of the Most High, the secret place being the presence of God. Skip ahead to verses 9 through 15. It's prophecy 1693. This talks about the desolation of Judah, and this is going to be the state of Judah at the time of tribulation. Yes, Judah will be desolate. But then we go to verses 16 through 20. This is prophecy 1694. This talks about the restoration of Judah after Christ comes and defeats the enemy. And let's look at some of the blessings. It's verse 17. And the work of righteousness shall be peace, and the effect of righteousness, quietness, and assurance forever. So everlasting peace. And my people shall dwell in a peaceful habitation, in sure dwellings, and in quiet resting places, when it shall hail, coming down in the forest, and the city shall be low in a low place. So protection is another blessing that will come upon the restoration of Judah. And blessed are ye that sow beside all the waters, and send forth thither the feet of the ox and the ass. So, blessing upon the sowers. And I suppose that's talking about the plowers too, those who sow and plow. So apparently agriculture will also prosper upon the restoration of Judah in the end times. Chapter 33. This is a very vague chapter. I'm not certain whether it refers to Sennacherib of 2 Chronicles chapter 32. He invaded Judah, captured a number of its cities, and was looking to invade Jerusalem. King Hezekiah sent him gifts and presents out to him in the hopes of changing Sennacherib's mind, but he did not. But this eventually caused Hezekiah to call out to God for help, and in one day God wiped out 185,000 of Sennacherib's armies, which are covered in chapters 36 and 37 of Isaiah. It can also refer to the Antichrist, which we'll get to, which I'll explain in a minute. Okay, verse 1, prophecy 1695. Woe to thee that spoilest and was not spoilest, and dealest treacherously, and they not deal treacherously with thee. When thou shalt cease to spoil, thou shalt be spoiled. And then when thou shalt make to an end to deal treacherously, they shall deal treacherously with thee. What this seems to be talking about is the making of a treaty, a promise to to stop attacking, to make peace, and then only to later on go back on his word. Hezekiah tried to make peace with Sennacherib. Sennacherib no doubt received everything Hezekiah sent him, but chose to invade Jerusalem anyway. It's believed that the Antichrist, in the end, at the period of tribulation, will make a peace treaty with Israel and break it 3.5 years therein. Then going down to verse 3, it says, at the noise of the tumult the people fled, at the lifting up of thyself the nations were scattered, and your spoil shall be gathered like the gathering of the caterpillar, as the running the to and fro of locusts shall he run upon. This is talking about the slaughter of the enemy armies. It happened to Sennacherib, and it will also happen with the Antichrist in the end times. Verses 7 through 9 is prophecy 16:97. It says, behold, their valiant ones shall cry without, the ambassadors of peace shall weep bitterly, the highways lie waste, the wayfaring men ceaseth. He hath broken the covenant, he has despised the cities, he regardeth no man. Again, this can apply to both Sennacherib and the Antichrist. When the effort to make peace with Sennacherib failed, no doubt the ambassadors of peace wept bitterly, as will the leaders of Israel when the Antichrist breaks his peace treaty with them. Thus the line, he hath broken the covenant. Actually, this word covenant seems to more apply to the Antichrist, since there will be a treaty signed, when there was never actually a written treaty signed between Sennacherib and Hezekiah. Okay. Verses 10 through 12. This is prophecy 1698. Now I will rise, saith the Lord, now will I be exalted, now will I lift myself up. Ye shall conceive chaff, ye shall bring forth stubble, your breath as fire shall devour you, and the people shall be as the burnings of lime, as the thorns cut up shall they be burned in the fire. And actually verse 13, hear ye that are far off, what have I done, ye that are near. So that appears to be the judgment, first and foremost, on the Antichrist, or Sennacherib himself. Again, there were 185,000 of his men wiped out in one day, as we have already established. But he doesn't just stop there. Verse 14 says, the sinners in Zion are afraid, fearfulness hath surprised the hypocrites. Who among us shall dwell within the devouring fire? Who among us shall dwell with everlasting burnings? And then verse 15 talks about who shall dwell. Those who walk uprightly, speak uprightly, and despise the gain of oppressions. So the sinners of Zion and the hypocrites will also face judgment as well. They faced judgment when Babylon came, and they will face judgment at the end times too. All right, well, that's all the time we have. Next time we shall finish chapter 33. Thank you.